Let's bring in Michael Fauntroy, Associate Professor of Policy and Government at George Mason University. Thank you, Michael, for coming on to speak to us on this day. Let me ask you to begin with about President Biden's speech and just how forceful and powerful it was, kind of a departure in terms of the tone that he's used in the past when talking about it.
Yeah, and I think he was forceful and powerful because the moment required it. American democracy is at its weakest point since the U.S. Civil War. And I think that those who want to see democracy continue and be strong have to be more forceful in their words and deeds. And President Biden did that today. I thought his comment about bruised egos regarding ex-President Trump and his comment about you can't only love your country when you win really do get at the heart of what this is about. And hopefully, though I'm a little concerned about it at this point, hopefully people will begin to listen more clearly about this. You know, there are large numbers of people in the United States that want to act like January 6th wasn't a big deal. And they have been provided aid and comfort by a alternative media stream that similarly acts like this doesn't matter. But it does. And I'm hopeful that today will mark a new chapter in the movement toward getting the country to understand what really happened.
He also made mention of China and even Russia, saying that the United States is in a struggle between democracy and autocracy.
And he's right. And unfortunately, not being able to deal with Russia and China without also having to deal with internal concerns makes the job that much more difficult. There are vast numbers of Americans who still believe that the 2020 election was stolen. And as a consequence, they are, in their own fomented anger and anguish about their view on what happened, are very much open to authoritarian and anti-democratic beliefs at this point. I'm not quite sure how to turn that around, but that's where we are. And as a result, we have a lot of work to do.
Well, and Michael, he took obviously direct aim at Trump. Well, he didn't mention him by name, but he certainly laid the blame at the feet of the former president. Let me ask you this, just how influential still is the president and the state of the GOP, the former president, and the state of the GOP?
Beverly, I am sad to say he's probably more powerful within the Republican Party now than he was on January 7th of last year. The fact is that all of the Republicans, or almost all of the Republicans, who forcefully spoke out against the January 6th mob and who in some cases referred to him directly, have all receded to the sidelines and allowed President Trump and his supporters to take center stage within the Republican Party. And we do not yet have a strong enough voice within that party to help push back against this drift toward authoritarianism that Trump is leading within the Republican Party.
And Trump was originally scheduled to speak on this day, maybe from Mar-a-Lago. He canceled that. What do you make of the decision, well, I guess originally to speak and now not?
Well, the decision to speak was problematic. It just showed, again, how he's trying to make it about him and his grievances. The decision to cancel, I think, was about cooler heads prevailing upon President Trump. There would have been no benefit to him politically in doing it, so he did the right thing. But quite honestly and quite frankly, this idea should have never crossed his mind in the first place. And the fact that it did tells you a lot about what you need to know about where he is right now in his thinking.
And the investigation, which is sweeping and ongoing, there's more than, or I think 725 people now have been charged, and they say that more will be of the tens of thousands that were there, or thousands that were there. There was also an intimation from the Attorney General that some of those investigations may involve people higher up in terms of the organization of this, potential criminal charges for others. Do you see a path forward that would ever involve the former president?
Theoretically, it could, but President Trump's sort of legal strategy has been to delay, whether it's with regard to the January 6th insurrection, the civil investigation in New York, or the Manhattan District Attorney's criminal investigation. So I do believe it will rise above just those people who breached the Capitol, but I think it would take a really long time to get to President Trump.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today. Michael Fauntroy, Associate Professor of Policy and Government at George Mason University. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We'll hear